Michael Roderick, thanks. Finally getting you on. So many scheduling conflicts, so many elements trying to like prevent us from getting on here, but we're hot spots and overseas, and it doesn't matter. We finally got connected. I'm so happy to have you on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So Broadway producer, playwright, theater director, entrepreneur, motivational. I get your newsletter. I get your email, your daily emails, and I'm always reading them, and
Thank you.
definitely trying to implement all those points that you have every day.
Thank you.
And sometimes I gotta binge read because I'll lose track for a couple of days, but I never delete them. I always read them. Yours, and I say there's maybe two others that I always follow. So Michael Roderick, I mean, tell me a little bit more about who you are, what you do, what you've been up to.
Sure. So started as a high school English teacher. I went from being a high school English teacher to becoming a Broadway producer in under 2 years. So I had a lot of people ask me how, and I started to study networking. So I started to host workshops where I would simulate networking experiences, have people act out one-on-one meetings, job interviews, and cocktail parties. And I noticed a lot of patterns in terms of just how people interact and how people sort of operate in the world. And I eventually sort of hit this point where I started to develop a bunch of frameworks around relationship building. So started teaching those frameworks. A lot of people kept coming to me and saying, can you teach me more? Can you sort of help me, get to the next level in my career? All of those types of things. So ended up kind of moving more into that sort of like entrepreneurship coaching space. Ran a conference for a number of years called ConnectorCon, where I brought connectors together from lots of different industries. And then probably about 4 or 5 years back, I happened to sort of notice that the whole sort of networking world was starting to get very, very overcrowded, and also just kind of filled with people who were giving a lot of empty promises.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to be associated with that kind of market. So I started to ask myself, if I took networking out of the equation, what got me into all the rooms that I got into? And I realized it was because people would talk about me when I wasn't in the room in a good way. So I decided to kind of go back to the drawing board, and I started to study referability. So I started to look at, why is it that people talk about us and our ideas when we're not in the room in a good way? And I basically started to break down principles for that. So now most of the work that I do is helping thoughtful givers become thought leaders. So usually people who are very good at doing the work and helping their clients, they're the ones who are the most likely to deprioritize packaging their intellectual property.
Mm-hmm.
So I come in as sort of a mix between Malcolm Gladwell and Don Draper for these people, and help them package their ideas, get their stuff out into the world, and all that fun stuff.
So I think honest relationships, that's the tricky part, is trying, I agree, is weeding out those connections that aren't reliable, those empty promises, those wannabes, entrepreneurs, whatever the hip word is these days. And I guess it's important to stand out as that guy so that people seek you out. And there's not like this mass of people. And again, I'm a bit ignorant to the whole ConnectorCon and the whole, these networking parties. I've done very, very few of them. And
Sure.
With what few I have gone to, there was a couple of Production Alliance events from different states in the DMV, and all these, this Creative Alliance or this Production Alliance. And you get there, and the problem is, in my experience, you have a lot of local vendors. You have a lot of local. They're at the electrician and the grip and the PA and the Steadicam level, and at the rental house level, but they're not the Will Smiths. They're not the Zack Snyders in the area, with production houses, with studios. And I think, for me, that is where that disconnect is. It's like, yeah, sure, freaking, Netflix comes and does House of Cards for 4 years in Maryland, and then they've done 4 seasons, 5 seasons, then that's it.
Hmm.
Now what? But where
Hmm.
is when you're saying there's a creative alliance or there's a production alliance here in Virginia, in Maryland, and DC? Okay, you've got a rental house with some gear. Who's putting that gear to use?
Yeah.
You know what I'm
Yep.
saying? And half the time, Netflix is gonna fly gear out.
Hmm.
How often are they utilizing the local rental houses?
Yeah.
So as far as that production alliance, but that's in like my specific case. But
Yeah.
I guess, the benefit of your situation is that you're a guy that's already known and sought out, and then you can bring people that you trust. You can bring those people together, essentially.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, in essence, everybody has the ability to bring people together. The biggest thing is that most of the time we make the assumption that that's just what other people do, right? So we all have the capacity. Like we could all host something and bring people together within our industry and give them
Mhm.
the opportunity to connect with each other, meet each other. But there's the extra hurdle of like, will you actually do the work, right? Like, will you actually put those people together? Will you do the scheduling? Will you figure out like where are you all meeting and sort of going through that particular process? So the thing is, there would be a lot more gatherings in the world. There would be a lot more, instances of people coming together and helping each other and supporting each other if there were more people who actually decided to take the time to set something like that up, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
Um, and I think that a lot of the time, what tends to happen is there is this belief that maybe I'm not the right person in the industry. I don't have the right level of connections to bring people together. Why would it be valuable for me to bring people together? And the thing that I always come back to is that you never know who people know. You never have any idea of sort of which connections there are and what opportunities there could be. So it's always worth it to say, okay, well, why don't I just get some people together that I think could benefit from knowing each other, help each other, especially in the same industry, and ideally, as you start to develop that, one thing that can be even more effective is actually getting people from other industries together, because when you get people from different industries into a room, there's so many new opportunities because people in one industry don't necessarily know about the things that are going on in your current industry and sort of
Yeah.
your world. So the more that you kind of think about that, the more that you get people together and have those conversations about what everybody's trying to accomplish, the more you can actually get done, from just a standpoint of not only building new relationships, but also just like making things happen, right? Like you could, if you hosted a mixer of a bunch of people who were in the film industry, who were all sort of production oriented, you could, by the end of the night, have a production team,
Hmm.
right? Because you're
Hmm.
meeting all those people and sort of putting them all together. So I think it's just an opportunity that a lot of people miss out on and never take the time to do, mainly because it seems like it's this big challenging thing, but really it's just taking the time to figure out where's everybody going to meet, who are you inviting, curating that group, and then just getting them together and letting them have some conversations.
No, you're right. And going back to like me, this particular podcast is the third attempt. Two failures prior, and quarantine was that opportunity to do that and just reach out to all these folks that I know that are kind of in film and TV, that are in AV, that are in finance, that are in music, or maybe not even into anything that I'm doing. And there was, and you raise a great point where there was in the within the last 5 years, I worked on two feature films with a guy by the name of Pierre Walters. He was one of the producers and one of the stars of both films. And he was also working on this entrepreneurial building up this service-based website where he'll work with, task managers. He'll work with other entrepreneurs, musicians to work on their music release. And so when I saw him on Instagram say, "Hey, bro, I'm doing this podcast. Love to get you on and talk about, some of the film gigs." Oh yeah, I'd love to talk about this whole new venture that I'm doing. Now he's talking about all that crazy stuff. But one of his ventures is music representation, where two of my other colleagues, now have the opportunity to talk to him and kind of link up with him. But then my two colleagues that are in a web series, Pierre Axe, I got him to come on and be in one of my web series, which was COVID friendly. So it was like this incestuous in a good way, but it was like this. It was like this, like when you're like making dough and you just start like mixing all this stuff, and I'm working on this thing with him, and or I'm kind of linking him up with two other people to work on that other thing, and then I'm talking about it on the podcast, and I get him on another show with those two guys and me, and then send him. And then I just recently sent him a screenplay that hopefully we're able to, get greenlit in the next year. Mm-hmm. And you never know, man. I mean, it's just like you just like, hey, you come on this thing, and then a friend of yours comes on this thing, and then me and you were working on this. But for me, I think I do, again, going back to what you're saying, like you have to be aware of those folks you can't trust, that you have to be aware of those folks that are a little shady, what have you. Mm-hmm. But for me, yes, if I've been burnt by somebody, I'm going to distance myself from them, or, what have you. But I'm so open to experimentation. I'm still open. I'm not open to wasting my time, but I am open to experimentation. I'm still open to going to different production alliances or creative alliances and just talking to people. And going back to one of those production alliances, I bumped into an actor, Connor Marsh, who I was talking to him about this supervillain crime show that I produce. He's like, "Yeah, I get called Clark Kent all the time." I'm like, "Holy shit, you need to come on my show. Come on my show, do a season on my show. It'll take a day and a half of shooting." And then he came on there, and he's such a git, because put a sweater, put a button up with a couple of the top buttons undone, put a sweater, put glasses. He kind of combs his hair over a little bit. He's a spitting image of Clark Kent. He could be the next Clark Kent, and it adds that. And it was just one of those things. And so there is actually thinking back to that production lines. It actually was beneficial, because there was somebody, but. For me, it's just like, just walk in the door and see where the chips fall. A lot of times for me, that's where I get good stuff, is experimentation, flip of the coin. A lot of times in the military as well, I'll tell people, like, listen, this is just where the hammer fell. Roll with it. Don't try to catch every raindrop. You're not going to be able to stop the rain. See where the hammer falls, and if shit sucks, then I'll work with you, and we'll work to see how things come together. And 9 out of 10 times they were like, it's not that bad. It's not that bad.
Yeah.
I don't want to mess with the gods. It could be worse. So
yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, and the thing is, the more that we are open to other perspectives, other opportunities, other industries, the more opportunities that we end up having, right? Because our world, our industries have a certain level of opportunity, right? There's certain, number of things that are around us, and a lot of the people around us are kind of doing a lot of the same things, right? Mm-hmm. So there isn't a lot of variance in terms of sort of where things happen. But there's this concept, it's known as the law of weak ties. And basically the idea of the law of weak ties is that your strongest results often come from your weakest connections. So the people that you barely know are usually the ones who are able to help you far more than the people that you know really, really well. And the core reason behind that is that everybody who knows you really, really well is all part of kind of the same opportunities, right? They're
Mhm.
kind of part of the same pool. They know a lot of the same people, but the people that you don't know well at all, they're part of all sorts of other opportunities. They're parts of all sorts of other worlds and other industries that you may never have even heard of, right? So there's so much opportunity in exploring what is going on in other industries. Like, what are other people doing? And really, at the heart, that's where some of the biggest innovations come from, is somebody from one industry shows up in another and says, hey, we've been doing this forever in our industry, why don't we do this in yours? And all of a sudden there's a whole new idea, there's a whole new concept. Sometimes it's a, sometimes it's a business. Like, so many things happen when we take the time to sort of explore those weak ties
Mhm.
and collect those weak ties and sort of bring everybody together, um, who have different perspectives and see and see things in a different way.
Yeah. No, that's a good point, because first thing I thought of is not the same opportunities, but the first thing I thought of is, okay, more opportunities and better success is going to come not from those who I know well and I've worked with before, maybe, because they know what they can get away with. They know what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
And it's like, hey, bro, I need you to do this. And they're like, yeah, sure. But they know they can only get away with doing half of it, because I'll be like, well, fuck, I'll pick up the slack for you.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's like, you don't want to be a jerk and kick him in the ass, or you don't want to just cut him loose.
Yeah.
But I mean, luckily I'm blessed with two very tight friends that are still colleagues, and we still work on projects together. And I tell them just straight up, like, here's what you got to do. And
Yeah.
once you've checked all boxes, we'll go. I'll take it from there. But until those boxes are checked, bro, can't help you. I'm
Mm-hmm.
not doing anything, because we've had those hiccups before. We've butted heads before, and now we're more mature and we're a little bit more successful in things, and we all now get it.
Yeah.
And there's that discipline, there's that dedication, there's that understanding. And there's times where you just got to be like, listen, you got to do the prep, I'll do the pro, and then no, yeah, and then we'll both jump into the post.
Mm-hmm.
And that's it. I'm not, if you need some help, pointers or some help, sure, but I'm not doing it all, man. And
Yeah.
so that's what came to my mind, is
Yeah.
that like, you, for the same reason why you never get involved with family.
Mm-hmm.
Never do business with family. You should very rarely do business with friends.
Mm-hmm.
That's sort of thing, because your mom will start barking at you like you're going to do what I tell you. And I'm like, yo, that's not what this is. You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Whole
so,
different. Yeah. I used to have that conversation all the time when people are raising money, because a lot of the time when people talk about money, they talk about a friends and family round, right? And the challenge, if you decide to raise money from your family, is if you lose that money, you've still got to see your family.
yep,
Right. So
yep,
you're going to be at Thanksgiving dinner or any number of other events, and you're like, yeah, sorry, sorry, Uncle Joe, I lost your 50,000 on that movie. Do you want to pass the cranberry sauce? It doesn't go over so well,
right, yeah, yeah. But and then so, like, yeah, weak ties, strongest success is from the weakest ties. Yeah,
Yep.
absolutely. So, knowing you've got you I know you've got the email that I read every day, and
Hmm.
so that's digital. You can do that remote. I know you got a podcast as well,
Yes.
yep. So how have you been impacted the last year? I know, probably, we've actually been coming along really well, but say
Hmm.
the last, last 12 months, the whole last year,
Sure.
how have you been impacted?
Yeah, I mean, one of the biggest challenges is I've got two very, very young girls. So I've got an 18-month-old and I've got a 4-year-old, right? And in New York City, where I live, it was really just like a serious lockdown, right? Like it
Mhm.
wasn't just like a, hey, you got to wear your mask and go outside. It was like, nope, like everything shut down.
Right.
Like we had instances where there were like lines out the door of the grocery store, like all those types of things. So the first thing was suddenly in, working from home, as opposed to being able to be like, okay, I'm in this room, I'm going to get this work done. And the kids are out at, daycare or out at school or any number of those things. It was literally, they are here all the time. Right.
Mhm.
So the joke that I made, I actually wrote an email about this during the very beginning of the pandemic. I wrote that we were all the BBC dad now. And we all remember that video of the BBC dad. He's doing the interview, and all of a sudden the
Yeah.
kid busts in, and the
Mhm.
little kid busts in. And like that's really what happened, right?
Mhm.
So, one of the things that I had to sort of adjust to was the fact that I would be on a call, and my daughter would come busting in, and in some cases, poop and and be like, I need a change in the middle of a sales conversation or in the middle of a business conversation. So it was a whole sort of different beast, in
Yeah.
terms of that. And then, a lot of my conversations, a lot of the things that I had done were in person. Like I hosted a lot of dinners in person. I hosted a lot of gatherings in person. So suddenly I had to kind of switch gears and do things virtually. And it was hard. I think that, one of the things that is discussed quite a bit about what happened when everything sort of locked down and we had this sort of pandemic situation, um, was that it was sort of a dream come true if you were the type of person who was quiet and sort of wanted to stay at home, like you could just sort of stay at home and read your book. But what wasn't really talked about that much was if you were the type of person who loved to be out and loved to interact with people, and that was where you were getting most of your energy, it was brutal to suddenly not be able to do anything or sort of see anybody, except sort of through digital means. So it was a
Right.
very, very interesting dynamic. And one of the things that I did at the very beginning, I've had my podcast since like 2015. So I've got a decent, sort of followership, listeners, whatever. Um, and one of the things that I did during those first, I want to say it was like the first 15 weeks, was every week, rather than submitting an episode with an interview, I just recorded a solo episode where I talked about how I was dealing with things. I talked about the things that I was learning. I talked about the things that I was discovering. And that was pretty well received. I had a number of people who told me that, just hearing somebody else's take on sort of like, how do we think about this? And like, what do we do? Was really helpful to them. So I would say that's kind of like the biggest aspect of the impact was that dynamic of sort of going from this being out all the time and having the balance of when your kids are around to suddenly being in all the time and your kids are just always there.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, shoot, I want to say like April of 2020, there was a couple of projects I was editing with him on the strap, that chest harness,
Mm-hmm.
and editing with him just like this, and he's like asleep, and then eventually he goes in the bassinet, and we had two bassinets. One was right next to me at the editing suite, and then the podcast grew, and I would have a different schedule. And I'm sure you remember way back constantly changing the schedule.
Yeah.
You and I must have had 10 different scheduling conflicts
Yeah.
because the second he's 3 months old, all right, now he's on a different schedule. And
Yep.
now he's 9 months. No, was he 9 months? No, now he's 6 months old or 7 months old. Now he can go
Yep.
to daycare. So now we're taking him to daycare. And we were
Yep.
able to get very limited daycare So now we got to figure out what that day is. And yeah, I mean, it was definitely a challenge. I mean, just parenthood alone, it was a challenge. But I think
Yeah.
me and the wife were lucky in that, you know, she's a teacher and she was doing virtual teaching.
Yeah.
And then I was lucky, you know, or blessed or whatever you want to call it, some years prior, really tapping into live streaming, that whole technical
Mhm.
trend and that whole, you know, universe of that business live streaming. That's what ran the world from April 2020 to April 2021.
Yeah.
And now here we are, we're back to hybrid, if not fully. I'm a
Yeah.
huge I'm a huge I'm a huge wrestling fan, and I watch AEW, and they finally have Daly's Place in Jacksonville, Florida,
Mm.
100% fully loaded for AEW wrestling,
Yeah.
and it's really it was really mind, you know, it really blew me away, that first episode of AEW Dynamite. Um, the wrestlers, they were like over the top emotional, like we're all back, you
Yeah.
know. And
Yeah.
you know, and so it was fun. It was really great. It was really exciting to see a full packed wrestling event. And
Yeah.
I don't know if you're pro, I don't know if you're a fan of pro wrestling. I always have been. And
I watched it a lot when I was a kid.
yeah.
I definitely remember watching it a lot when I was a kid, and it was very entertaining. There were a lot of there were a lot of real characters sort of
Hmm.
within that within that world, and those stadiums are always packed, right? Like they always have a very large crowd. So yeah, it must have been so interesting to sort of, you know, have this period in which nobody was in those stadiums, and now people are finally, you know, going back and being able to watch and being able to sort of have that experience. I think it's you know, this re-entry period is going to be really interesting for so many people after having such a long stretch where you really weren't able to do much of anything, you know.
Yeah. And just seeing, and I've talked about AEW before, and their COVID workarounds. You know, I don't think they skipped one episode. I
Mm,
think I think their first COVID quarantined episode was a lot of talking heads. I don't think there was any matches, but they came out and said, "Hey, we're still here. We're gonna show some highlights from like previous nights or whatever, but we're still here. We're gonna make this thing work." The next week, I think they had half the wrestlers out there working, and they had
mm.
everybody else on their roster in the front row,
Yeah.
and they were cheering on, and they were, and you know, I'm sure you know, they're assigned to either boo the face or boo the heel or
Yeah.
whatever. Uh, and there was, and ever since April 2020, they've only been at Daly's Place every week. It wasn't a traveling show like you know, once COVID hit, they only worked out this one venue, Daly's Place.
Yeah.
And like I said, the front row were all the wrestlers, and then they started doing, I think, 25% capacity, and you'd see like some
Hmm.
spots of people here and there. Uh, oh, hold on one second. Oh, there we
Of
go.
course.
Can you still hear me?
Yep, I can still
Always,
hear
always a glitch, man. That's quarantine for
you.
you. But but yeah, but then seeing that progression and watching it, because I was so excited about AEW coming out as the competitor to WWE. And then a year later, COVID hits, and I'm like, gosh, man, what the hell? They got a great roster. They got all the names that I want to see. Everybody that WWE lets go like idiots. And then things were going so good. And then they kept it going.
Mm,
And then they just stayed steady and smooth and limited and
hmm.
small. And now it's back to the way it was a year and a half ago, and even more, and it's even more so appreciated because you saw them really struggle to make that workaround work.
Yeah,
And you care, and you know, if you're a wrestling fan, then you're going to care about, you know, what wrestlers you care about.
of course.
And And then, you know, the beauty of it is, and I wish you were a fan too, so you could know what I'm talking about. But
Yeah, yeah,
maybe some of the viewers do. But
sure.
as these characters start growing in their popularity, they got real slick. And about a month ago, they dumped some money into purchasing some really dope songs to
Mm,
have as some of these guys' entrance themes. But they're
yeah.
still at like 50% capacity.
Mm,
And then a couple months later, they're at 100% capacity. And the whole stadium is screaming these entrance songs, and you're just blown away. And it's like,
yeah.
wow, these folks were freaking watching the whole
Yeah.
year, loving these characters, and it was because they chose to, you know, think outside the box, be creative, stick around, make it
Yeah.
work. Yeah, man.
Yeah.
I
They
mean,
pushed through.
perseverance,
They pushed through.
perseverance. They didn't let this thing, you know, completely destroy them. Yeah,
Yeah. It's pretty impressive. I
yeah,
think like there are a lot of things that closed down, that shut down, that stopped. There are a lot of businesses that shuttered during during this whole time. So yeah, the ones that figured out how to shift the way that they were doing things and push through, um, it's definitely one of those just very impressive feats in lots of different industries. There have been different groups that really just pushed through and made it work, and it's it's just overall very impressive.
yeah, absolutely. So as far as your networking events, or
Mhm.
now, are you still involved in Broadway and theater and
Every once in a while, I mainly just sort of introduce people to opportunities. So like, if I see a show that I think is, really solid, I'll introduce them to some other producers, or if there are people who are trying to become producers, I'll introduce them to
yeah?
more established, producers, or introduce some money to some projects and things like that. But I haven't had anything come my way that I've been like, yeah, I'm going to raise money on this. You know what I mean? Like, I feel really excited. I feel really excited about it. Um, and it's the type of thing where I think only if something came along that I was just like, yeah, this is worth taking all the extra time it takes to go out there and start raising money, right?
Yeah.
Then I would do it. But for the most part, it's mainly just with a lot of these shows, I'll just introduce them to somebody or try to be helpful, sort of wherever I can.
Well, the reason why I ask, these networking events, you know, Broadway, the podcast, whatever, whatever it is you have going on, have you been back out in the field, back on set, back on location, back on a site somewhere?
Yeah, I mean it to a degree. I haven't done a ton, but I've started to get some invites from friends and colleagues where it's like, yeah, we're gonna get together. We're gonna get together for coffee or drinks, right? I had one friend who just sent me something where he is going to be hosting sort of a smaller gathering of like 10 to 13 people. I've been to some like outdoor picnic networking oriented types of things. I probably won't host anything in person for a while, until we sort of figure out like how leveled out things here are in the city, especially because I have young young kids, right?
Mhm.
Like with the fact that they're not able to be vaccinated yet, I want to make sure that I'm not hosting some, event that could cause, some challenges. So I mainly am still kind of doing more virtual stuff and putting people together that way. But I imagine as things start to continue to open up and we start to get to that place where it is a little more comfortable, I'll probably start hosting small events to start, and then hopefully as time progresses, be able to do larger events.
Yeah. Awesome. Awesome. So what's next on the agenda? What's the next set of goals? What's next on the agenda for Michael Roderick?
Yeah, so I've written this daily email for since probably about 2017. So I've been writing um, Monday through Friday, uh, a daily email uh, since then. And I've had a lot of people ask me about my writing process and sort of how I write this way and, those types of things. So right now I'm actually in the middle of teaching a class. I'm basically walking people through that writing process, and it's basically a beta version. So I'm like sort of taking them through how, I'm teaching them the process, and I'm getting feedback as they kind of go through it. My hope is, once I'm at the tail end of this, to be able to do the program again, refine it even more, and maybe even eventually have it be something that is digital that people can kind of do on their own. But for now, I'm still doing it in sort of that capacity of like sort of teaching them, um, the writing process and sort of the structure stuff in person, and what not in person, but like live. And then hopefully it'll sort of move to more of that like digital kind of world. So that's what I'm excited about, is the growth of that and sort of building that out. I've also been having some conversations about putting together a traditional book proposal about this idea of referability, and sort of breaking down these principles of what makes something referable and how do we become referable, and all of those ideas. So been working on putting the pieces together for that, and yeah, just continuing to do all the things, and obviously being a dad, and growing the business, and all the things that you do in the entrepreneurship space.
Yeah. Yeah. So I've seen referability pop up on your emails a
Hmm.
lot. If you could make one point of, because I know you're still working on that, but
Sure.
but what is the first thing that comes to your mind when you think of referability?
Yeah. So basically, what I think of is the fact that for a very, very long time, we've always sort of focused on the idea of differentiation being the thing that makes us successful, right? So businesses have always been sort of presented as they did something different, and this is why they're successful. And what I've seen is that different does get you noticed. Like somebody does notice you if you're different, but people talk about you when you're referable.
Hmm.
So it's important for us to think about, how are we packaging our ideas? How are we putting our stuff out into the world so that people talk about it when we're not there?
Hmm.
So that people share these ideas, as opposed to just being like, oh, well, that's different.
Right.
Right. Um, so that would be kind of the biggest point, is that I think that we've reached a point where everyone's so many people have tried to teach people or sort of push people to being different, that everybody's different is now starting to sound the same.
Right.
So the only thing that really cuts through the noise is referability. It's whether or not somebody else talked to you about a particular thing, right? Like
Hmm.
it's really the only way these days, that like when you think about a brand, or you think about something that you know you hear about all the time, or that your friends are always talking about, you will then go and talk about that thing to other people, right? In much the same way that, this podcast we ended up talking about wrestling, because these wrestlers and this industry has spent the time really becoming referable, right? By purchasing songs that everybody recognizes. Every time somebody sings one of those songs now, if they're a fan of wrestling, they're going to instantly associate that song with that person who walks out,
Right.
right? So it just extends the brand. So now if that song comes on the radio, and you're a fan of a particular wrestler, and their song comes on the radio, to you it's no longer just a song, it's that wrestler's song. So that sends you back to the brand, right? It sends you back to the show. It gets you back to that place, because there's that trigger where you're like, oh,
Hmm.
and this is the thing, when brands take the time to think about what are the elements that we can do, how do we package this so other people will be reminded of it and talk about it, that's where things really take off, and that's at the heart of referability.
Okay. Yeah. No, that makes sense. Absolutely. So, I know our time's running low, but before before I bring this to a close,
Mhm.
what comes to mind if I were to say to you, what's the new year, new you? What's the new year, new normal?
Mm,
Because to me, really, the new year wasn't January 1st. It was more like
yeah,
April 1st.
yeah,
How we came along from actually March 12th to March 12th,
yeah,
2021, and
yeah.
where I got my second vaccine in February, and
Hmm.
I got my
Congrats.
second shot in February anyway, and so the wife got fully vaccinated, I think, in March, and so really that was the new year. Like
Yeah,
me and the wife are fully vaccinated, and we're ready to get our son vaccinated, and we're good with no masks, and now they're saying, if you're fully vaccinated, you don't have to wear a mask anywhere
yeah,
ever, unless you feel it's you know in your best interest or whatever.
sure.
But that's kind of what the new year is to me. So if I were to say, what's the new normal you, what's the new
Mm,
you, new normal you, the new year, new you,
yeah.
what's one thing that comes to mind?
I mean, it's I think it's this aspect of there's still a level of caution and there's still a level of adjustment,
Yeah.
right? So I think that I know that I personally am not going back to an attitude where everything is perfectly fine and I'm just gonna, do things exactly the way that I've done them before, right?
Hmm.
I'm going to be thinking about, if I'm hosting something, what is if I am hosting something in person, what is the capacity? I am going to be thinking about vaccinations, right? Like I am going to be thinking about all of these additional things, having these additional considerations. So I think the new year is really, for me at least, focused on being thoughtful about interaction, um, which I think has always been important. But
Hmm.
I think it's even more important now. And that's not just thoughtful in terms of just from a safety and sort of medical standpoint, but thoughtful in terms of we don't know what a lot of other people have gone through. So we may see friends who we haven't seen since the beginning of all of this, and we have no idea if they lost their job. We have no idea if they experienced something. Have no idea if they lost somebody to COVID. Like there's so many things that we are not going to necessarily know about how our acquaintances and the people that maybe we've known in sort of that more of that sort of outside circle. So we have to be thoughtful in our interactions. We can't just make assumptions at this stage in the game. So I really think that the new year is going to be about thoughtful communication and addressing our assumptions.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I think that the biggest thing that I saw a change in, and maybe I'm wrong, and it's just there's people that are just all over the place, all up in your face. You can't go out and have a good time because of, you know, some people are just always outlandish. And
Hmm.
now, as it turns out, some of those folks are still that way.
Yeah.
And it's and you're and they're being called out on that behavior in a much uh more important level of playing field here, I guess.
Yeah.
I don't know. What the first thing that comes to mind, because you brought it up, it's more
Mhm.
thoughtful interaction.
Yeah.
And, me and the lady, we would go out, and there's, the frat boys, or, just so the younger crowd that's a little bit more rambunctious. And now
Hmm.
they've gotten a harsh learning lesson.
Yeah.
And that was the first thing that came to mind. And I don't know why, because I don't really go out much unless the wife wants to drag me out to a happy hour or a brunch or
Yeah.
something. But going back to your newsletter,
Yeah. Yeah.
I see that you always sign off with Excelsior.
Yes.
What is that? What's the
Yeah.
background behind that? What drew you to Excelsior?
Yeah. So I read comics religiously when I was a kid. And I was a very, very big fan of Marvel. So I had like complete series of different books. I was always buying comic books, and Stan Lee had a section of these comic books that I think it was called the Bullpen or something along those lines, where basically he would sort of write like a little letter to you as the comic book reader.
Oh, okay.
And whenever he would sign off, he'd sign off with Excelsior. That was the sign off. So when I started writing for actually way back before I even was writing a daily email, back when I was writing a blog, I basically decided to use that as my sign off, as sort of a tribute to that experience of my childhood. And then, of course, when Stan Lee passed, it became an even more sort of important tribute and something to sort of carry on. It's in essence a battle cry. It's this sort of statement of um, uh, onward and upward kind of
Victory. Yeah.
feel. Yeah, right. So it's
Yeah.
like so it serves as a really great way to sort of wrap something up, and it has a significance for me because it takes me back to my childhood. So I made it the thing that I sign off with, and I love using it, and I use it in pretty much any sign off that I do for my daily email.
Yeah. I mean, I think I Googled it
Hmm.
after one of your, and I think it's Latin, Excelsior.
Yeah, I think it is. I think
It's
it
I think
is.
it's Latin for, great things or victory or something. And now I can't remember, because we've been trying to like connect for months or maybe even years.
Yeah,
Who the hell knows anymore?
I know,
And
right?
so I Googled it way back when I first saw that. First saw, I think, your first email
Hmm.
newsletter email, and I said, Excelsior, what the hell is that? And I think I Googled it or something. But
Yeah.
but yeah, I mean, that definitely stands out. And I have a web, so going back to that web series I was telling you
Hmm.
about, me and my colleagues and that guy Pierre, that actor who I had on the
Yeah.
podcast, and then got him on. So we have two web series. They're produced in the vein of those ID crime shows,
Oh, okay.
but
Yeah.
one's set in the DC universe, one's set in the Marvel universe.
Oh, fun.
So say Tony Stark went home, had a cocktail like he did quite often,
Yeah.
and sat down and watched ID, Investigation Discovery. What would
Yeah.
he see on ID? What kind of
Uh,
crime shows would he see? So we produced something in that vein.
oh, that's
Um,
fun.
yeah, because I've always had this thing in my mind that I have to be producing something of my own to
Yeah.
try to get my thing kicked off.
Yeah.
I want to get my hands dirty. Of course, I want to be acting in other shows. I've played a detective or serial killer, mostly a detective or a cop in 40, 50, 60 of those ID crime episodes. And then one day I was on the set and I said, these things are shot and produced so low budget. We could
Yeah.
pull, how could we pull one off? Oh, let's do one that's set in, like, it'll be fictitious. It'll be like meta or
Yeah.
some such nonsense. But
I love that.
But yeah, I'll definitely send you a link to that.
Yeah, I would love to check it out. That sounds awesome.
Once we get off here. But Michael, I can't thank you enough for coming on and sharing your expertise and your stories and your ideas. And Excelsior, and close off with Excelsior. But any links? First off, I'll go ahead and mention Small Pond Enterprises.
Sure.
Based out of New York, the newsletter. If you go to Small Pond Enterprises, and let me see if I got this website right before I biff it all. No, I got a different email here. smallpondenterprises.com, and definitely to what few viewers I do have, definitely subscribe to his newsletter, because it's a great little quick point for entrepreneurs, for creatives, just for creatives like myself. There was definitely one point that stood out. Let me see if I can find this one thing, because I'm always kind of like making notes off of your notes.
Sure.
But it was, oh gosh, it was the case for being another.
Yes.
Already doing this, and I've always argued, okay, you're not going to be able to guess the trends. You're never going to be able to guess the trends.
Yeah.
But I like Marvel, and I like pro wrestling. There's so many other podcasts and YouTube channels dedicated to comics and supervillains and pro wrestling and whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But I like it.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to try to be something new and talk about something that no one's ever talked about if I don't give a shit about it.
Yeah.
But
exactly.
But for me, what people don't seem to realize is that one horror movie hit opens the door for other horror movie hits.
Yep.
And if you like horror movies, then make horror movies.
Yep.
So that was, and I've been arguing that point with my colleagues over and over and over again. And, sometimes you just have to agree to disagree, but that was one of the most recent, was that the case for being another is what stood out for me. So
thank you. I appreciate that.
Well, listen, Mike, can't thank you enough for coming on. Any other plugs, links, socials, or sites you want to put out there before we jump off here?
No, I mean, I'm just at, I'm on Twitter at Michael Roderick. I'm all over the socials, so you can feel free to, say hi, and always happy to be helpful wherever I can. Michael Roderick, Small Pond Enterprises. Can't thank you enough for coming on here. It was a blast. Definitely want to get you back on, sometime down the road, maybe do like a roundtable thing, like a small group thing. I'm always experimenting and kind of like, playing with new things to do with this show. So who the hell knows? That would be fantastic. But again, to my viewers, I hope I've earned the pros every time of viewership. I know my guest has, and until next time, you know what to do. To the viewers out there, if you want to become an honorary member of the Zombie Squad, send me some, hit me up on any of the socials. Send me the name that you want to be credited as a honorary member of Zombie Squad. Send me your favorite 1 or 2 profile pictures, avatars, what have you, your profile pictures on Instagram, Facebook, whatever, and we can squad you up. I will make you an honorary member of the Zombie Squad, and I'll design all the stuff. I'll design a t-shirt, I'll design your logo, your whole Zombie Squad kind of profile if you want to be an honorary member of Zombie Squad, and give you the options to buy a t-shirt, to buy a phone case, to buy a pillow, to buy a tapestry, to buy a hoodie, to whatever the hell you want. But if you want to be an honorary member of the Zombie Squad, let me know. And
but they got to put in the work though.
All they have to do is send me 1 or 2 of their profile pics, and they'll be an honorary member of the Zombie Squad.